Noon sharp
Here
start.
we go. It's Evan Kirstel here. I'm have a fantastic guest and a very deep topic for a Monday. The author of Wireless Wars: China's Dangerous Domination of 5G and How We Are Fighting Back by Jonathan Pelson. John, how are you?
Doing great, Evan. Great to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to have you, as this is a topic I've been following with great interest, as have many of us in the tech space. And you've written really what I think is the foundational piece on this topic of China versus the U.S. in 5G security and beyond. Before we dive into the book, Jonathan, maybe just introduce yourself and your background for the audience.
Sure. I was a telecom and technology exec for a long time before I became an author. I worked at both the equipment side and the service provider side. So I've been with Lucent Technologies back in the day in the 90s when the industry was on fire, British Telecom on the service provider side, and Nextel. Uh, so I've been for close to 30 years working in technology and telecom. And about 3 years ago, I decided I had just left a role where I was helping sell a company off to kind of spin off a division. I decided to write a book, and I picked a topic that I thought was going to be a little dry, just how the West telecom equipment makers lost the market to Huawei, a Chinese giant. And I thought it was really going to be a business book that I wrote. And the advice I give now to first-time authors is pick a topic that just before you publish is going to become incredibly important to everybody in the world and will be the most talked about subject, which is China's role in the supply chain and 5G, what it's going to enable throughout the world. And that was I'll call it dumb luck, but it's really made for a very different experience. And as I learned with the book, it's less about business competition and more about political intrigue and really rivalry of great powers, which was not my understanding until I started really doing the deeper research into it.
That's fascinating. So tell us when your antennae, no pun intended, perked up regarding China and 5G and Huawei and this whole world. For me, it was, only a few years ago, but I think for you, maybe a little earlier. Tell us more what started to get your attention and, your awareness around this whole topic.
When I was with Lucent, I was there when we were 120,000 employees, and I was there when we were 35,000. From the boom to the bust, and we saw some things. I did business in China. We had very unusual cases, things that unfolded while I was there and afterwards. And one of the things that I saw was we had something called the PathStar switch. This was a kind of a cable IP voice device. So it would allow your cable company to connect phone calls. At the time, that was a big deal. And suddenly we learned that there were 3 employees who were actually spies. They had stolen the source code, they had stolen hardware, and one of them had fled back to China when the FBI made arrests. What I found incredible wasn't just that there was industrial espionage, because that happens, but that the government of China told our CEO, the CEO of Lucent, we have nothing to do with these people. They're not acting on our behalf. And if you prosecute them, we will lock you out of all business with China for at least a year. Like, well, that's a funny response for someone you have nothing to do with and
That
wasn't going
escalated
to.
quickly, as the meme goes.
And the CEO, she told me this was a tough choice. Lucent, the wheels were already coming off, and these were 2 low-level engineers that were stealing code on a product. We risked $500 million to $1 billion in revenues to China if we prosecuted them. And she said the pressure was so great that we had to just say, you know what, I'll do a settlement, pay a fine, turn them loose back to China, and we got to just go on with it. And what I started to see at the time there was that there was a bully in Asia that was using its enormous market to compel other companies to do things that they shouldn't have been doing. And it was, as I learned as I did the research, far worse than that.
And so this wasn't just an anecdote. I mean, corporate surveillance and espionage has been as old as modern times. You get this whataboutism. Well, the U.S. steals secrets, and of course we do. But the anecdotes started to pile up. Right? It wasn't just Lucent. It was Nortel. It was Northern Telecom, the great Canadian telco. It was Ericsson. So you began to see a pattern, as did many of us. Is that right?
It's right. And here was the eye opener as I was doing my research. It was a couple of months into the research. And for me, what it really consisted of was calling my old colleagues, either people I had worked with directly, like Patricia Russo, Pat Russo, or Jim Brewington, who were the people that ran Lucent and Lucent's wireless division, respectively, or Frank D'Amelio, who was the CFO and then went on to become CFO of Pfizer, Dan Hesse, head of Sprint. I'd call them, we talk about things, some of them that I wanted to ask them about, some of them that I was there, and I wanted to say, can you recount your perspective on this? And the book was coming together when I, just through happenstance, a friend who knew I was working on the book was in a meeting with an FBI counter intel section chief. And he said that he knew this guy was writing a book on Huawei. And the FBI officer said, well, I ran the FBI's Huawei team.
Wow.
So FBI has a Huawei team. Why would they have a? And so I got a hold of this guy. And what he told me blew my mind. He said, do you know where Huawei is installing cell towers in the US? And I said, well, nowhere. They can't get any business. They can't sell to Sprint. And I talk about that in Wireless Wars, how they were blocked from making that, $4 billion rollout. They just sell to mom and pop companies, small cellular operators in the middle of nowhere. And he said, what's located out there? I said, yeah, nothing. It's North Dakota. It's Oklahoma. There's nothing out there. He said, it's all of our nuclear missile bases. They're all served by Huawei, or just about all of them. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I'm going to send you some open source information from the FCC that the FBI had to root out through its own research. And all of these nuclear missile bases around the country, the nuclear subbase, the Special Operations Command, where we have Navy SEALs and Delta Force training. Curiously, Huawei showed up at these small, rural, family-owned wireless carriers, because Verizon's not putting stuff in Great Falls, Montana. And they said, we'll put in a tower. We'll equip it with all the cellular equipment. We'll do it for $8,000. And the family business would be like, well, Nokia would charge $80,000 and they're not willing to return our calls. They don't want to put in 9 towers out in the middle of Montana. So these companies, they checked, it wasn't illegal. They installed Huawei. And so we put all this Chinese-owned equipment into our most sensitive military bases, where all the nukes are and everything else. Now, as a lot of people that follow the industry knows, the Congress finally got wind of this somehow after 10 years after Commissioner Rosenworcel, at the time commissioner, now chairwoman of the FCC, 10 years after she notified the Senate of this. And so Congress allocated billions to rip and replace all that Huawei gear. And Evan, I was giving an interview on the book to a newspaper, and I explained this to the reporter that this is all being torn out now. And she said, okay. And I said, hold on a second. I sent a note to a friend who's involved with the replacement. And I said, you guys did replace the Huawei gear, right? And he said, well, about that. You see, Congress set a rule that seemed reasonable, which said you can only replace the Huawei gear with like equipment. You can't use this opportunity to upgrade to the new cool stuff. You just have to tear out the Huawei 4G and put in the new Nokia or Ericsson 4G. And not only did the carriers not want to put in a brand new 4G system, they want to put in 5G, but the customers, including these nuclear missile bases, said, we want better security. 5G is a more secure network. Don't install 4G. And so years later now, it's all still Huawei. It's literally, they haven't torn the stuff out yet.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm not sure if I'm shocked or not at that, but tell us about Huawei, because sort of all roads here tend to lead to Huawei. Tell us about the company, its history, and its organization.
Sure. And I will say, although Huawei does take up a big part of the book, ZTE and a lot of the other PRC-based, Communist China-based tech firms are all kind of in a similar place, whether they're state-owned or, in the case of Huawei, theoretically privately owned. Now, one of the first things I looked at was who really owns Huawei? Well, the employees own Huawei. Okay. Well, there's some lawyers at American University, a lawyer at AU who studies Chinese corporate ownership and law. And he really dug in deep and shared with me his findings. And here's what we learned. The owners of Huawei are the employees only in that they have kind of a profit sharing. They get a piece of the action, and when they leave, they forfeit that. They don't take stock. They don't hold voting stock. In fact, you look at the governance. Okay, how do those owners exert their governance on Huawei? Well, they don't. The union is their voice to the board. Okay, so the union, how does the union make its decisions? Well, the unions in China don't answer to the union members like they would in the US. They answer to the more senior union, who answers to the more senior union, who answers to the Chinese Communist Party. So the Chinese Communist Party has the voting control of Huawei. And so you can say whoever you want owns it, but they're at the will of the government of the country. Even apart from that, any company that's operating in China, is bound by the 2017 Intelligence Act, which says all Chinese companies are required to cooperate fully with the intelligence authorities and turn over information that they want. And Evan, you said, well, doesn't everyone do that? Not really. NSA has a huge budget. They're trying to get their hands on anything they can around the world. There was a scandal, and I'll call it that, some years ago where they found that the NSA was intercepting shipments of computers and servers from American big name manufacturers, and they were loading some firmware or hardware into them on the way. So that happens, but it's two important differences. One, those companies, HP, Dell, whoever, they hated that. They were furious because it hurts their sales internationally. And they didn't want it to happen. They weren't willingly cooperating. They said, you're going to make people stop buying American equipment. So that was not a good thing. But the second thing is there's a difference. You can't say America is all purity and good. Every country has its flaws. But if you want to compare the totalitarian and authoritarian governments of China, North Korea, Cuba, Iran, to Germany, the US, Japan, Korea, these are democratic countries that answer to the people, and you really can't say they're all in the same all cut out of the same cloth, because they're really not.
Yeah, it's a great point, and that's typically the answer to this kind of story is whataboutism. It's from the old Soviet days as well. The Soviets would say, well, what about your racism and what about your segregation when we would talk about human rights? And it's a similar kind of thing. What about your NSA and your spying? So it's classic propaganda. So tell us. I mean, we've had our vulnerabilities here in the U.S., but I think Europe is even more entrenched, at least was, with Huawei and their networks and smart cities and cores and RANs and enterprise technology even. How are they trying to, distance themselves now, or are they?
Well, I was with British Telecom when the company made the decision to roll out Huawei into its what they call the 21st century network, 21CN. And Huawei got the edge of the network, almost got the core of the network. It was decided that was too sensitive. But as you and most of your followers know, the edge of the network in a modern network is very sensitive. It's no longer the dumb radios and antennas. It's now, if you're penetrated at the edge of your network, you're penetrated through to the core, because you have a level of processing and information pushed out there that is far more sophisticated than it was 15, 20 years ago. So BT rolled out Huawei. It was much cheaper. And I spoke to the CTO of Huawei at the time. There's a guy named Matt Bross and Ben Verwaayen, who was the CEO, about what drove their decisions. And I understand it. Ben Verwaayen was trying to save a company that had billions and billions, tens of billions in debt. And he was same thing that most companies did. They said, is this illegal? Is this barred by our intelligence services? And they said, no. And he said, well, I'm trying to save my shareholders. I'm going to buy stuff that costs half as much as buying it from Marconi or Alcatel or whoever. Now Matt Bross made the final decision on going ahead with Huawei. Their big break into a Western European carrier, and not long after left British Telecom and took a job as the CTO of Huawei. So that worked out. That worked out well for him, certainly. The rest of Europe kind of jumped on board, and they were rolling out that equipment right up until 2 years ago. Angela Merkel decided to go with Huawei for 5G for Germany's networks, and it was only a revolt from her own party, the first time this had ever happened in her long, long tenure as chancellor, that her party said, you cannot put in the Huawei gear. And that happened literally as I was writing the book. It flipped from we're all in for Huawei to we're resisting it to finally most of Europe said we're not going to be deploying it into our public networks.
So interesting how the energy story with Russia and Germany's and the rest of Europe's dependence on Russia energy kind of mirrors this dependence on Huawei and China for telecom. So, I'm glad to see this change of face. Better late than never, as they say. Tell us about the Chinese and Huawei ZTE influence operation, because I find that fascinating. I've been offered lots of cash to promote the brands, but a lot of people have, kind of been sucked up into that organization, whether it's spokespeople or employees or CTOs or, who's out there, as the face and name of these companies like Huawei today.
Yeah, I was dumbfounded what I learned there. You saw, I have a chapter in Wireless Wars where I talk about all the great foes of Huawei. You had the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, had a very effective kind of chief technology officer, chief security officer named Andy Purdy. And he wrote the regulations that really were going to make life so hard on Huawei, and we're going to secure the American networks. I put on CNBC while I was working on the book, and you had stories about Huawei were in the news, and you had their spokesman saying, you are all suffering from Huawei derangement syndrome. There's nothing to worry about here. We're a safe company. And I looked, and it was Andy Purdy. It was the former head of securing America from Huawei. You had Admiral Bill Owens, vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was all in for Huawei. He was, I talk about a story where Huawei was pitching Sprint, and they had the head of the network, president of Sprint Network, out in I guess Shenzhen it would have been, and Bill Owens accompanying him as their American agent. Now he supposedly worked for a company, Amerilink, that was just there to help any vendor sell to any carrier, and his role would be to make sure the equipment wasn't compromised from a security point of view. I say, well, what does that job even mean, Admiral? Because Nokia and Ericsson, no one worries about them being compromised. There's only one company that makes sense for, and that's Huawei. And curiously enough, he was there very closely working with Huawei. So you have this meeting with the Sprint head and all, Ren Zhengfei, the chairman founder of Huawei, and Ren, the head of Huawei, says, we're going to turn our guns together against Verizon, and we will help Sprint defeat them. And everyone cheered. And you have this Admiral, vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, they're all cheering for Huawei, helping turn the guns on Verizon. And you realize that for the right price, I'll say, you can flip the most patriotic American, or the most seemingly patriotic American. And Evan, it's a long list of generals, admirals, senators, congressmen. I mean, the senators who set up the Department of Homeland Security signed on as lobbyists for ZTE. And what worries me is with some people, some of these people were extremely wealthy before they decided to chuck their loyalties and join up. And my friends in the intelligence business say you have to look at whether there's honeypot operations where someone is compromised, not by money, but by other information on them. And I don't speculate by names on that, but it certainly is a question when you see someone worth $100 million agreeing to leave their role to basically advocate against their own country.
Fascinating stuff. Wow. This is a lot to take on a Monday morning. Thanks for sharing. So tell us, you provide some commentary on solutions and on the pushback and how we can take our, intellectual property and technology back. Tell us, are there some bright spots on the horizon? Things like the Chip Production Act making semiconductors here, nurturing and supporting more local technology innovation here in the US on the infrastructure side. What say you on taking a more optimistic look at the future?
Sure. So I've had the opportunity over this past year to help advise various government agencies, commerce, different groups in intelligence and legislative side also. And here's how I describe it to them. I said, if we decide we're going to put all our wood behind one arrow, and the government's going to create a consortium, and we're going to build a response to Huawei and ZTE, and kind of China Inc., if you will, that's a losing proposition. I said, China is really good at that. They know how to align everybody, cut through the red tape, and just say, here's what we're all going to do, and everyone does it. America is not so good at that. That's discouraging. What is encouraging is that we are much better than China, and I would argue than anyone else in the world. But look, free countries all share these traits to some extent. We are much better at turning loose the forces of creativity and entrepreneurship and innovation, saying, come up with something that the big guys haven't thought of. So you got Huawei, they got a $20 billion a year R&D budget. They can hire, 50,000 R&D engineers. They're bigger than anybody, but they're not bigger than everybody. And what I argued to Commerce and others is, if you turn loose the forces of what I refer to, I didn't coin the phrase, permissionless innovation, what you can get is things where telecom networks look more like the internet. So you have some Caltech software student, a junior at Caltech, can write handoff software for a mobile network. You can have Dell say, we're going to convert one of our servers to work like a phone switch or a router, a base station, a radio. If you let all these companies interact much more freely, and you have them and you have the forces of software coding, whether it's in the West Coast or Israel or India, whether it's in Ukraine or Romania, wherever you're finding your talent, turn everybody loose. And now you've got 1 million coders against 50,000 at Huawei. And they're all motivated by self-interest, by money. Call it greed if you want, but they all want to do the next big thing. And instead of it being Nokia and Ericsson, who are fine companies and are really the last men standing holding the line for now. I don't want to, believe me, I'm not knocking them. But putting 10 billion into them is not what I recommend doing. I say open things up, whether it's Open RAN, creating this network where anyone can add their equipment to a telecom network, or whether it's something else. It needs to look like this. Freedom, companies being turned loose. You look at what that creates. Companies like Uber and Amazon and Airbnb were all created with this permissionless innovation. They did things that weren't even legal. They had to fight the government in court to pick up strangers on the road or to use a home as a hotel when it wasn't zoned as a hotel. But in a free country, you can face your government in court and have a chance of winning, as they've mostly done. China, you do not want to face your government in court. And in fact, I talk about in the book, leaders, technology innovators who get crosswise with the government. There was the head of a major financial services company, and he was arrested, charged with illegal fundraising. He was raising money through some more innovative way than had been done. And he was arrested on January 7th of last year. And I wanted to see what his status was for a talk I was giving. He was executed 2 weeks later. They executed the CEO of one of the biggest financial companies. That'll stifle innovation, if you know what I mean.
Well, that's probably the worst case. Look at Alibaba, and the leader there has been sent to go finger paint and learn watercolors or something in some back room. So very dangerous times. So how's the book been received? This has been quite a blockbuster topic, and this is I see it as a piece of investigative journalism as well as a good read. What's been the feedback like?
I went in with moderated expectations. My publisher, let me know. Look, if it's not a cookbook, a book about vampires, or a celebrity tell-all, there's only so much reach. But to my great pleasure, the book's been selling really well, and even more so. And I think this has been something I was really most pleased is within the industry, it's gotten a lot of take up. I see it on bookshelves, not just on my own, but a lot of the leadership in the business have looked at it. And as one of them put it to me, the last section 5, which is, all right, what do we do about it? Said should be required reading in the industry. And I think in some sectors it's become that. And to my amazement, the government and the intel services have really been interested in this. The reason I'm a bit surprised at that is because, like, I don't have security clearances. There's nothing in here that required that. But a lot of the interviews I did were apparently uncovering information that the intel agencies didn't know. And maybe the synthesis is what's of interest to them. Like, how did this come to bear on the businesses, and how do we get out of this mess? So
yeah, it's very useful for anyone, business leader, tech employee, anyone interested in geopolitics or politics. So it's a fascinating read. Let's shift gears on a final note here. What are you working on personally? A next book? Are you consulting? What's up with John personally?
Well, so one thing I was considering, and you'll see this in the epilogue, is I got a call from an executive recruiter who wanted to know if I wanted to seat on the board of China Unicom, state-owned.
Well, that's not what the goal is here.
This sounds excellent. What would be better than a plum seat on a company bigger than AT&T and Verizon combined? They wanted me to lead the fight against the Department of Justice, banning them as a security threat to the U.S. I said, that's fun. I would have thought you'd hire, say, a former attorney general for something of that magnitude. And well, I am, as an author who's writing a book calling out the security threat from China. So I think that opportunity passed. They've been banned from the U.S.
I'm guessing you're not a persona non grata there now.
It's unfortunate. Yeah, and believe me, I am not getting on a plane into Beijing to hold those meetings anyway.
Or Hong Kong, by the way. That would be not desirable.
That is for sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. We lost your audio, I'm afraid. Oh, there we go.
Are we good now?
Yeah, we're good now.
Yes, I saw that just went dead on me for a second there. What I am doing now is really advising both government agencies and private sector about best ways to tackle really the threat from China in terms of telecom, and how to build a response that's not a directed, government directed response. So I'm doing board advising and leadership team consultations, and I'm meeting with people until I'm cleared. I can't name the names, but senior people in the U.S. government about how to bring this business sensibility to the government's response to China.
Well, thank you for this book. Thank you for sharing all your insights and stories with the audience here. And I'm about halfway through, so look forward to catching up again. But thanks so much for joining us, John. It was a great discussion.
A lot of fun, Evan. Glad to do it anytime.
All right, sir. Thank you.